We're taking a regular ThinkPad X230 laptop and upgrading just about everything except for the CPU, and also decking it out with a full Akira themed paint job. This one was hellish to get through, so let's go! I picked up this X230 on eBay for about $100. It's nothing fancy or special, and it's kinda rough as you can see here. Here are the specs of the system. It is somewhat decent with the i5-3320, and had I known how much time I was going to be investing in this computer, I would have gone with the i7. It did come with 8 gigs of RAM and a 256 gig SSD. I also opted for the IPS display because I'm going to be upgrading that later. The outdoor lighting is very unforgiving, and you can see all of the flaws in the casing, but here under the indoor lighting it looks a lot better. I didn't really care what the condition of the casing was because I knew that I was going to be painting it anyway, but I didn't want to get something so trash that painting wouldn't fix it. For the price, this is a very decent laptop for what you get. I have way too many really large laptops because I like them, but I wanted to do something different and get something more compact. This is actually my second X230. I tend to buy computers and then sell them and then re-buy the same model later on. I don't know, it's a mental disorder, I'm sure. But I am learning, so I'm just keeping all the computers now. So I usually have way too many computers and then sell a bunch of them and then want them again, so then I rebuy them, but at least I try to get them for cheaper on the second time around. Anyway, let's break this computer down. I need to fully dismantle it because I need to separate the computer parts from the casing parts because I don't want to paint on the computer parts. Thankfully, ThinkPads make this very easy in comparison to taking apart other laptops. Since I'm taking it apart anyway, I'm going to be giving it a cleaning, and we're also going to be upgrading some of the components in here. I would say the X230 is on par with the W541 that I dismantled in my other painting video, so check that out if you want to see that. I did have a little bit of trouble trying to get the main board out of the bottom half of the case. There was one screw still stuck in there, but overall pretty easy, especially if you've done this a few times already. And now with the bottom half of the computer taken care of, we can move over to the top part. I'm not going to bother taking out these wires that go around the monitor because I think it's easier just to mask them off and tape them up when I'm painting. This wrist panel is a bit complicated, but I did need to remove all of the parts because I couldn't paint over the fingerprint reader or the touchpad. I am going to leave the covers on the bottom part of the case because I do want to paint those as well. I had been going over back and forth in my mind if I wanted to just paint over these ThinkPad logos or mask them off and incorporate them into part of the design. This was pretty tedious to do, and I just went really slow and took my time with the X-Acto knife. I probably should have just used some transparent tape to mask this off so I could actually see below it, but the blue painter's tape is a bit transparent, so that did help a little bit. I knew I wanted to keep at least the wrist pad logo because that was going to be incorporated into the design more. I was more weary about this one on the top panel. And having done one, it was actually a bit easier to use that as a visual reference. And now that I'm done with that, we're going to move on to my favorite part of every painting project, and that is sanding. And yes, I am being sarcastic. It is boring and tedious, but it has to be done, so I'm just trying to rip through it as quickly as I can. And after sanding all these parts, I'm going to be wiping them down with some alcohol to clean off all of that sanding debris that I had just created. And yes, I will be painting the battery, even though I know that the battery is going to fail at some point and I'm going to have to repaint another battery if I want it to match. And that's just something that I'm okay with. I actually even did this later because this battery started to die and I wanted to get a 9-cell pack. And as always, I'm going to be throwing down a primer layer for better paint adhesion, so it is prime time. And as you will come to see later in the video, this is the start of my red nightmare. And here comes a series of unfortunate events, beginning but not limited to, you see that tiny little bug there just trying to hang out where I want to be painting. This is going to be something that really bugs me later, and pun intended. I'm not going to blame everything on the bugs, but they were definitely a contributing factor to why I struggle so hard with this paint job. This is just one of the perils with painting outside or not having a booth for painting, but right there's another bug just right in the middle of where I want to be painting. And yes, I do take responsibility because there are things I could have done to make the bugs not so much of a problem. I did manage to lay down some red without too many bugs intruding on my process, but then I ran into another problem, which turned out to be my own painting technique, or more importantly, lack thereof. The red came out okay, but the gloss did not. It is patchy and textured and not uniform whatsoever. I'm not used to painting with gloss. I much prefer painting with matte finishes because they are a lot more forgiving. Since I really didn't want to start over, I figured I might be able to get away with just sanding off the top coat and just making all of that textured part smooth again, and then respraying over that, hopefully doing a better job this time. After a long time sanding, I also did some research on my technique on how I might have messed up and how to make it better. From watching a bunch of examples, I believed my issue was that I wasn't laying down enough paint. I also wasn't overlapping my previous paths, which was causing that inconsistency. With gloss paints, there is a fine line between too much paint and not enough. And as you can see, these pieces for this go around were coming out a lot better. The top panel was still looking a little funky, so I figured more paint is gonna fix that problem, and no, it just came out looking terrible again. Some parts look decent like there, but then I'm still getting that rough textured, and when I compare it to the other parts, they are silky in comparison. This didn't really make sense to me because I painted them in the same exact way at the same time, the same temperature, the same humidity, everything was the same. I figured it must have been my technique because I fixed the other parts that I was having a problem with, so I must have just messed up on this top panel. So after a lot more sanding, I figured I would get my technique even more consistent, even better, and give it another go, and add even more paint. And this is what happened after that. This is the worst result yet, and I've already redone it 3 times. To me, this is a sign of way too much paint. I put way too much paint in the hopes that I would make it look consistent. What's even more frustrating is that the overspray and the test sprays that I was doing on the box look great. Just the part I'm trying to paint, nope, looks terrible. And this is when you know you have way too much paint on your part, when you can do things like this. This is right about the time in this build where I started to descend into madness. I felt like when I die and go to hell, this is going to be the task that I am dealt with for infinite amounts of time. Just trying to make this top panel red and clean and just coming up short and messing it up every single time, like forever, over and over again. I thought to myself, this can't be me. I already painted all the other parts and they came out pretty great. So what is up with this top panel? I came so close to just throwing this top panel in the trash and deeming it as cursed and just purchasing a new one on eBay. One of the good things about me, and also one of the bad things about me, is I am incredibly stubborn. So I told myself I would only give up if I tried one more time, and to give myself the best chance, I took off all of that paint. Look at that. That is just ridiculous. This easily took me more than 2 hours, probably 3, and it was extremely tedious, and after I got all that paint off, I still had to sand it down and make it smooth. I didn't know it at the time, but reflecting back now, I really do think that it had something to do with this rubberized coating on top of the top panel. My other ThinkPad also has this rubber coating, but I think that on this one in particular, it was just deteriorating or eroding in a way that was affecting the paint on top, which is weird because I did have a primer layer on top of that, so I think that it was just messing with everything. Laying down this coat was nerve-wracking. I just crossed my fingers and Bon Jovi'd it, just living on a prayer, and I had finally defeated the curse. It is by no means perfect, but is the best my sanity can handle. And after about a full week of getting bogged down and painting the top of this, I wanted to move on and actually progress on this project. And here I am laying down some rulers so I can import these real-world objects into the digital realm. I tried to find some high-quality images of Kaneda's stickers, but none of them were coming up to the standard that I wanted to print at. I wanted very clean prints, and the only way I was going to get that was hand vectorizing every single one of these stickers. And once I finally made them in the crisp resolution of infinity, I was able to start laying them out digitally on top of my measured images. Now comes the equally nerve-wracking part of trying to lay down the print on top of my painted panels. This is my outline test print, just making sure everything is in the correct place, because if it's not, I only really have one shot at doing this. If I mess up in any way on this portion, it's back to the drawing board and then repainting things in red, and I definitely did not want to do that. I tried my best to arrange most of the stickers on this front panel because that is where most of the real estate is, and I also wanted to imitate how they're arranged in a random fashion like they are on Kaneda's bike. Not really sure how this happened at all, but there's about an inch gap off of my template, and yeah, that's why I do test prints first. To give even more layers and depth, I'm printing this iconic explosion image on top of the red in a different shade of red. I had no idea how this was going to turn out, and it could have been a disaster. I just randomly picked a darker shade of red to print over the existing painted red. Even though it is a very subtle element, I think it does add to the overall aesthetics, as well as tying in more of the imagery from the anime. I also felt like I kind of overdid it again on the graphics, but that is kind of my style. I thought, wouldn't it be cool to have the sides of the monitor bezel to be like a cascade of pills coming down and piling up on each other? I just felt like it was more interesting, and the only thing I would really change was maybe adding a drop shadow to some of the pills, especially a further away drop shadow at the top. I think that would have came out pretty cool. Here you can see a detail of that darker red print that is on top of the red paint. The print also has a different texture which catches the light differently, and I just think even though it's a very subtle element, I think it adds a lot. The only other thing I would change is the ThinkPad text on that previous panel is in black, and on top of the red there's just not enough contrast. I would have changed that to a different color and it would have come out better. And you can bet your shiny bitcoins that this was the most nerve-wracking piece that I had to print. This red print on top came down to a last split-second decision because I had kept debating back and forth in my mind. Should I do it? Should I not? Am I going to ruin this panel? And I'm really glad that I did it because it came out incredible. Another immense decision I had to make was, what colors am I going to print this iconic Akira logo? Was I going to do black letters with red kanji, white letters with red kanji, white letters with black kanji? Like, this was a tough decision to make. I honestly thought it looked good in all of the combinations, so what I did was a gradient with white letters and then red to black. This decision also came down to the wire because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do and I didn't want to redo this, and look how it came out. And as an unintentional bonus, the dark red of the explosion actually looks like the rising sun from the Japanese flag as well, and it just looks really cool. For all of the work that I put into this top panel, getting it to this state was so worth it. And even though you're not going to see it because it's on the bottom of the laptop, this was the next largest piece of real estate and I wanted to put something on it. So there's the pill logo, and I think it came out really cool. I transferred these back home with some cling wrap because I didn't want to touch any of the panels because I still was going to be covering them in a clear coat to protect not only the paint but also the print on top of that. You can use the UV printers to lay down a clear coat of their own, but I do not trust that. So I wanted to do that on my own. I was trying to be as delicate as possible lifting up this mask because I didn't want to pull up the print nor the paint underneath, so this was a little nerve-wracking as well. But I managed to get it all out and it came out really good. I also think that it fits in with the other stickers in kind of a random pattern and it fits right in. Now I was feeling very good at this point about the build, so I wanted to import something from Japan to complement it. It's pretty rare that I buy things from Japan, but every time I do, I'm crazily impressed with how much thought and care goes into all of the packaging. This guy gave me a bag of tea just as like a nice gesture. All of the markings on the outside of the box is like everything is perfectly placed. I'm just always impressed by it. And yes, I might have used this build as an excuse to spend $230 to buy this figure. Although I have been wanting this for a long time, I just couldn't justify paying that much for it. I mean, I'm already making the laptop, I just have to buy it, right? That's how these things work. But as soon as I took this out of the box, I immediately knew that it was totally worth it because this thing is so cool. This figure was used and already opened before, so I'm not desecrating some like unopened artifact from nostalgia before. The box design itself is pretty nice though, because you can still have it in the box and also display it at the same time. When I was doing this build, I didn't like paint match the red. It was just a Rust-Oleum Regal red off the shelf, and even though it's not a perfect match, it is very close. I thought the red tint was going to be completely off. It is a little bit darker and a little deeper, but I mean, for an off-the-shelf paint can, this is pretty incredible luck. I also think that my printed sticker placement is looking pretty decent compared to the real thing. When I first picked up the bike by itself, I couldn't believe how heavy it was. This thing is mostly made out of die-cast metal. It feels like it is actually real, just miniature size, because it has a lot of weight to it. I was not expecting it to have this many details, like the dashboard, even the wheels spin, like that. A lot of thought went into making this. I mean, yes, I'm not going to argue that this isn't very expensive, but there is a semblance of high quality all around. You can remove just about all of the plastic panels on it and just leave the metal skeleton. I thought this detail was really cool. The suspension actually moves, which is just crazy. They could have totally made that a static piece, but the fact that they did multiple pieces that slide in and out of each other, just to me, like, that's kind of what you're paying for, is just that attention to detail. Here's Mr. Kaneda himself, or Kaneda if you're nasty, or Kaneda, or Kaneda, however you want to say it, that's him. I couldn't find the exact font for this text, but I think I did good enough. Good enough for health anyways. I am glad I purchased this because it made a good side-by-side comparison reference to what I had been working on. We overcame a ton of hurdles in this episode, and I just want to thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. But stay tuned for the next episode because this build is far from over. We're doing some heavy modifications, then taking all the pieces and assembling it back together for the final build. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.